So moving on to our first slide. Let me just move this out of the way. Moving on to our first slide, let me talk you through the agenda for today. Firstly, I'll do these welcome and introductions and talk you through the agenda. The second point on the agenda really is an introduction to the Southeast Asian Toy Association. And Lisan will share with us the reasons that the Toy Association was created and some of their work to date and their successes to date. We'll then hear from Matteo, who will introduce himself as the new executive director at SEATA. I think he's just been in role a few weeks, so we are very lucky to get him so early on in his tenure, where we can learn from him, but also perhaps share with him some of your needs that he can consider as he goes forward. I'll then come back to talk to you about some of the impacts that we're seeing at the Ethical Toy Program from COVID-19, what we're doing in response to those, and what that means for the future moving forward. I'll then hand back to Matteo, who will take the bulk of our presentation time, really focusing on Southeast Asia, the whole reason that we are in this meeting today, looking at some of the opportunities, country by country, looking at the challenges and the responses, and then finally sharing some recommendations about how companies may want to move forward. And lastly, we have time for questions. So please use the chat function throughout. We've allocated about 20 minutes for questions. So it'd be great to use that fully and make sure you're leaving this with all the things that are perhaps on your mind being answered. So that is our agenda. Let me move on, and I will hand over to Lisan, who will introduce to us SEATA and herself.
Sure, thanks, Carmel. Thank you very much. It is 10 p.m. here in Singapore, both for me and Matteo. So apologies for any dips in energy or any other errors that you might notice. Really proud and honored to be here on behalf of LEGO. As Carmel already said, I head up the Government and Public Affairs function for Asia Pacific, and I also have the privilege to chair SEATA this year, and of course our chairmanship is on a rotation basis, but I do also have the privilege to sit on the board of SEATA along with Mattel. So let me now get to our mission. Next slide, please. Just sort of, I'd like to set the stage really of why SEATA was formed, our mission, some of our wins before I hand it over to Matteo and Carmel back. So locationally, we're based in Singapore. That's where our secretariat is, because geographically, of course, it does make sense to be in this part of the region. We were founded by Hasbro, Mattel, and LEGO, and of course, our membership is growing. And we're very excited about that, both composition of international as well as regional members. Our mission, of course, like a lot of similar toy and trade associations in the world, we definitely want to grow the sector and grow the potential of the sector in this region and beyond. We want to create a platform for exchange of discussion and information, but also flag risks within the toy sector in this region. And you know, just to point out that we are at this point the only international association focused on Asia. So I think it makes us an exciting mix of both international players as well as regional players who come here and facilitate these discussions and advocacy interests. Learning through play, again, is an extremely important element of our focus, and we do believe that that is something we will continue to advocate for in this region with governments, policymakers, and stakeholders, because the concept itself is at a very nascent stage. Of course, also looking at advocacy, broader advocacy agendas of our membership, and then most importantly, helping global toy and play companies from around the world access markets here in Asia and provide counsel on how to navigate complexities within the region. Next slide, please. So this is briefly the evolution of the organization. In 2011, this was the first time when the industry really thought about collaborating in the region as a lot of our memberships operations were also ramping up. 2016 was really our official incorporation or formal incorporation. And you might wonder why we sort of limited our scope at this time to Southeast Asia. And I think it was more about also tapping into the burgeoning market here. You know, one of the largest child populations are located in Southeast Asia, highest aggregated GDP growth from this region. So our aim and endeavor was to first start, pilot our coalition in this region, and then look at how we scale up to the rest of Asia. 2020 is a very exciting year. Of course, we do have our new colleague Matteo on with all his energy and drive, but we also are looking at moving the scope of SEATA from just the ASEAN region to the Asia Pacific region, which is really important as we see a lot of our membership's interest also growing in some of the key markets. And how we're doing that is definitely this year, India is another big focus for us outside Southeast Asia. And then of course, we're looking at you know, new services and new other offerings that we can provide our membership base in 2020. So we could call this sort of our rebranding journey from Southeast Asia to the Asia Toys and Play Association, which you'll hear much more about in a couple of months. Next slide, please. So these are some of our core activities. There are 4 pillars: public policy, and you know, very self-explanatory. We look at a lot of the trade barriers in the region that emerge, market access issues, monitoring the regulatory landscape because you have disparate jurisdictions which come up with different regulations. And of course, just the importance of intellectual property rights and how do you ensure that we are educating stakeholders and policymakers on the importance of protecting intellectual property rights of our membership. Business support, as we talked about, I think this is going to be a key focus area, and I know that Matteo is also going to talk a little bit about this, but this is about really providing counsel and providing expertise as to how you can navigate the landscapes within the different jurisdictions in Asia Pacific as you're trying to enter the market, both from a regulatory standpoint as well as from a policy landscape and stakeholder mapping standpoint. There could be examples of also members wanting to within Asia. So if you are already quite established within Southeast Asia, but you want to, you know, expand to India or expand to Australia, there could also be an intra-region support that SEATA can provide. Public awareness, of course, value of play, as I had already talked to, product safety and compliance. So really helping stakeholders focus, policymakers focus on a harmonization of product safety rules, because again, we see disparate product safety rules within different markets in the region, and that sometimes could then result in trade barriers and market access barriers for our membership. And then sustainable production is another key aspect really for us in terms of how we could take our membership's unique sustainable production values to the region. And finally, events, of course, you know, knowledge seminars and educational seminars. We did some interesting seminars on product safety and sustainability last year, and we aim to continue to do much more of those. Next slide, please. So just wrapping it up with some big wins, just to give you some context on what we have done. Intellectual property rights has been a big focus area for us. We've done some interesting workshops and trainings with both IPR enforcement officers, but also customs officials from Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. And really the goal is to increase their knowledge of what infringing trademark and copyright looks like for most of our brands. And I know that this has brought a lot of value, definitely for my company, but also for a lot of our other companies within the membership. Value of play, we've been working with the Indonesian government to ensure that there is play is an integral part of their educational policy and the policy towards children, and that is an ongoing effort that we are contributing to with the relevant ministries in Indonesia. We're also looking at a research paper and white paper on play and the importance of play, because it is a very nascent concept in the region. And so this is specifically, of course,
yeah, I'll be far away.
I think someone needs to mute. So we'll be focusing specifically on the on the emerging markets region, and then see how we could probably expand that piece of research. And then finally, you know, as I was talking about, just an example of the kind of knowledge seminars that we've hosted previously. As I said, we've done some pretty interesting knowledge seminars at the Hong Kong Toy Fair, focused on the challenges of product compliance and the different regulations that do come up within amongst the jurisdictions in the region. And we've also kind of talked about opportunities in manufacturing that are emerging in the region as an alternate to China, and, you know, talking about the potential and opportunities of Vietnam and India. So these are some interesting seminars that we've brought together in the past, and we hope to do so some more. Yeah, and then I think this is something which is such a huge focus area for us, a business enabler, market access, as I talked earlier. And one great example of this is Indonesia is one of the most complex regulatory landscapes, and they had a very burdensome toy safety law. We have managed to successfully move them from a very burdensome regime to a slightly less burdensome regime, which was a sort of a process of over 2 to 3 years. It's still ongoing in terms of, you know, some implementation details, but it was a fairly big win to get this advocacy shift with the Indonesian government. So just an example of how there are these very complex regulations that do spring up in the region, and it requires some real concerted and strategic advocacy to tackle these. And finally, our regulatory monitoring, of course, as I had mentioned before, which is valuable to the membership. Next slide, please. Great. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Matteo. After setting the stage for SEATA, I'd really like to hand over to Matteo and ask him to please say a few words about himself. Thank you.
Good evening and good morning and good afternoon, depending where you are. My name is Matteo. I've joined the organization just a month ago, and I'm actually extremely excited to be on board and to be part of this new journey in the toy industry. Just a little bit about myself. I'm originally Italian, but I've been living in Singapore for over a decade. And I've had extensive experience both in the non-profit sector as well as in the private sector. Originally, when I moved to Singapore for my studies, I continue with the European Chamber of Commerce, where I started, and I brought the organization forward, and also to the creation of the EU-ASEAN Business Council, which is a pan-ASEAN organization which works for the lobbying and advocacy of European companies in ASEAN. After that, I decided that you know, to try a little bit the private sector. So I had a very beautiful and great and rewarding experience with NXP Semiconductors. Different sector, you know, microchips, highly sophisticated, very technical, but my role at the beginning was really to advocate and to kind of do a bit of learning and teaching and sharing about the company's vision with ministers, governments, authorities, and so on, just to make sure that we would position our technology on the forefront. And then in the last 2 years of NXP, I transform myself in business development, sales. So had a little bit more, you know, hands-on on the business and try to grow the business and the sales of the organization in South Asia Pacific. And yeah, fast forward 5 years, I'm here, joined SEATA. I'm new to the toy sector. And as Carmen mentioned, this for me would be a great opportunity to learn from everyone. If there are questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them, but also to learn about the wish list of the industry. Lizum mentioned SEATA is going through a big transformation. We are going to expand the geographical scope. We're going to expand the offering of activities. So the wish list from the members, from the potential members, and from the industry stakeholders are extremely important for me to, you know, to define the right strategy moving forward. So later on, I'll be sharing a little bit more about this exciting part of the world, South Asia, with all the opportunities, the challenges, and how I think companies can successfully navigate and be rewarded by doing business and expanding business in this part of the world. Over to you, Carmel.
Great, thank you, Matteo. And Eva, I think we may have your daughter or your son or another young person in the background. So just a reminder, if everyone could put themselves on mute, that would help the speakers come across more clearly for everyone. But it's nice to hear children in the background, bearing in mind we're in the children's business. So
exactly, future customers.
That's a nice thing. We welcome their insights too. So I will just take a few minutes. I won't take too long because, but just to share a bit of an update from Ethical Toy Program. It's fantastic that so many of our members and our stakeholders have joined this, this session. It gives us an opportunity to give you a bit of an update. And like I say, just a quick reminder, I'm speaking briefly now, then we'll hear back from Matteo, who will go into more of the detail country by country, and look at the opportunities, challenges, etc. Southeast Asia. But please, throughout the presentations, if as you think of any questions, please put them on the chat function, use the chat function within Zoom. And we've got time at the end of the presenters' sessions to go through all those questions and answer them. So please avail of the people that we've got on this call, and make sure you get most value for your time spent. So moving on to Ethical Toy Program. Like I say, I won't take too much time in this because I think I know certainly many of you that have registered, and I think most of you will be quite familiar with our program. But as a reminder for those that don't know us so well, the Ethical Toy Program was established to be the only specialist labour standards program focusing on the needs of the toy industry globally. Together, we are a multi-stakeholder initiative. We're a not-for-profit organisation, and we work very collaboratively with all our stakeholders. So that be factories, retailers, toy companies, licensors, the civil society community, and most importantly, the workers who actually produce the toys enjoyed by children all around the world. So together we set the standard for ethical manufacturing, and then we assess a factory's performance against that standard, and if they meet the standard, they become certified. And we do that through a fairly traditional method of auditing a factory against the standard requirements. When they meet the required level, they become certified. If they need support in understanding what good looks like and what the standard requirements are, then we provide training and capability building. But that training and capability building is not just about getting them through to certification. We're very committed to a sustained performance of a high quality supply chain for the toy industry. So we provide our factory members and our buyer members with ongoing training and capability building support. Worker well-being is at the core of everything we do at the Ethical Toy Program. So we have a big focus on really understanding the needs of workers and responding to them through different programs such as our Family Friendly Spaces program, Women Empowerment projects, and also helping us understand the needs of workers through our worker helpline, which has now been operational for more than a decade and is really a unique and valuable part of our program. Finally, we are all about collaboration. The Ethical Toy Program was created fundamentally by the industry to remove the duplication of assessments and audits amongst the supply chain, because so much of the supply chain is shared. So we are about collaborating both within our own industry, but also broader than that, and with a range of stakeholders to ensure that we continue to understand the needs of our stakeholders and then meet them. We work with around about 1,200 factories in total. About 800 and something of those are actually certified. The rest will be working towards certification. And we cover more than 700,000 workers throughout our program. Taking just a moment to look specifically at COVID-19, then obviously this has been a virus that has impacted everyone all around the world. not just the toy industry. And in some respects, the toy industry has been quite resilient. I know there's some very tough times for some of our members, but some of our members are actually having a very good time. Toys, I think, are really showing their development and the positive nature of toys. With so many consumers being in lockdown and children being home from school, toys have been probably more useful and more valued by consumers than ever before. So our teams are fully operational. Most of our teams are actually located in mainland China. So we have resources in mainland China, in Hong Kong, in Vietnam, and in the UK. All our teams are fully operational, and the teams operating both in China, Hong Kong, and Vietnam are on the ground and operating as normal. We know that travel within China is largely unrestricted. Travel in and out of China may be restricted, but within China itself, it is unrestricted now in the main. So oversight and in-factory engagement is back to being normal, really, and quite possible. When the virus first occurred, our concerns were that there would be backlogged production from the extended Chinese New Year holiday, which was implemented by the Chinese government in order to manage the spread of the coronavirus in mainland China. They've managed that successfully, and factories came back to work after that extended period. Initially, there was a challenge to make up backlogged production, certainly with fewer worker numbers than before, but that largely has been addressed. And actually now factories are telling us that most of them have where they need workers. There's about 25% who would say they require more workers, but actually 75% say they require at the moment less. And that's really because as the virus has spread throughout the globe, consumer demand has decreased. So factories are seeing lower order volumes, which is obviously a major concern for the factories. Outside of mainland China and looking to parts of Southeast Asia and beyond, then factories are exiting lockdown at different times. So Vietnam largely now back to normal operations from the 1st of May, Thailand from the 1st of June, Indonesia partially, etc. So lots of changes and different timescales for exiting lockdown. I think everyone has understood that the impact of COVID-19 has affected every part of the supply chain. So whilst we're seeing the factories really struggling with lower order numbers, there is a real understanding about why that has happened, because the high street and the consumer demand largely has fallen very dramatically as the retail space has been closed. Hopefully, as more countries come out of lockdown, we'll see the retail environment open up again and demand increase. But what that has done, which is the last point, is put more of an urgency on some of the discussions, certainly that I'm having with some of our members, around their desire to diversify their supply chain outside of mainland China. I think we all recognize that mainland China will continue to be a very significant and important sourcing and manufacturing destination for industries and sectors all around the world. But there is increased and more immediate interest in how can companies diversify more of their supply chain. And hopefully we'll answer and help you with some of those questions during today's presentation. In terms of the response, again, we will send out this presentation along with a recording, so you'll have more time to look at the detail on this slide. But we are about ensuring the stability and supporting the recovery of the toy industry post-COVID-19. So ensuring that you have stability in your supply chain is really important. Whilst we do not want to reduce our responsibility to ensure that workers are protected. So we have extended the valid period for factories current certification. So factory certification, if it was due to expire at this time, has been extended to the 1st of October if they request it. Some factories are going through the renewal process as normal and require no extension, but we want to make sure that we are helping through recovery and not hindering any of that recovery. We've provided lots of advice directly to factories and to our buyer members through WeChat, through emails, through calls such as this. So we're getting a lot of information out to our factory members. And we've continued to have oversight through our progress visits. So even though the certification process may have been extended, we're still visiting factories and on the ground, which is really important. I want to just stress to you all that we are a certification body, and in that we have the ultimate sanction to terminate a factory who has serious issues and will not commit to resolving those issues over time. So we do have the ultimate sanction to terminate a factory from our program, but we do that very much so as a last resort. We will work as much as we can with the factory directly to ensure that they can stay with us and fix those issues, because we want people to be in factories that are certified by our program, and therefore protecting the workers through good employment. Our factory numbers are stable year on year, which is really fantastic news. I know in other sectors it's been more significantly hit, so we're delighted that we've had such commitment, and we provide clearly so much value to the factories that they have stayed with us, so that's really important. There's lots of information on our website, so please have a look at our website. There's a whole section there on COVID-19 and what we're doing in a bit more detail for immediate recovery, and then as we move to resilience beyond recovery, building resilience, which is an important element of our program. We've also given guidance on purchasing practices, really more aimed at the buyer community, and also on responsible recruitment, which is more aimed at the factory community as they seek to bring more workers on board as demand increases. So again, those are on our website within the COVID-19 section and the publication section. So please, I'd encourage you all to look at our website to get more information. We do have our worker helpline, which is really important, operating for more than a decade, and is open 12 hours a day, every day of the week. So again, a useful and important support system for factory workers. And our investment is being slightly redirected to recognize the environment that we're actually in currently. So we will be delivering more e-learning content for our factories and our workers to help them ensure that they're maintaining standards as we progress. So just looking at our program within Asia, we have 830 certified factories now. So the first figure I shared with you was around 1,200 factories in our program. So that larger number is the factories working towards becoming certified. But today we already have some 830 plus factories who are fully certified. 90% of those factories are in mainland China, but we're seeing significant growth in Vietnam, significant interest in growing in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and other countries. So as you think about your needs and the opportunity to diversify your supply chain, know that we are already in these countries, and there are already factories there who are certified and therefore can meet your needs very quickly. There is a useful feature, in the Connect platform. So all of those of you who are on the call who are actually members of our program, particularly buyer members, have access to our system called Connect. And part of the Connect system will enable you to identify potential new suppliers that you may already not be dealing with. So you can go in there and look at their information, and that can help you maybe as you think about working with new suppliers outside of mainland China. Just to kind of conclude my bit, I wanted to remind you of what I said at the very beginning, which is worker well-being is the reason that the Ethical Toy Program exists. It is our purpose to ensure that your objectives of treating workers fairly and with respect, that we support your commitment to do that. So we work very hard to make sure that we understand the needs of workers and we respond to them. So as well as the worker helpline, which is an incredibly valuable resource for workers, we also have a series of programs. Our Family Friendly Spaces program, which includes things like summer camps, after school camps, migrant parent training. all actually becoming more and more important as we look at supporting workers beyond the immediate situation of COVID-19, but we look to build resilience, and having trusted childcare will enable workers to get back to work confidently. So this area of supporting families through our program is really important. And then our Women Empowerment Program, again, really important. More than 60% of the workers globally in our factories are female, and largely they are employed at the production level. So it's really important that we fully understand their needs so that we can maximize their effectiveness within the workplace. So a really important area for us. And lastly, from me, just a reminder of the benefits of working with Ethical Toy Program. We know, particularly at the moment, that it's very difficult for many of you to actually get out and visit your factories. So as a reminder, the Ethical Toy Program means that if you're working with a factory that is certified by us, they have no outstanding non-compliances. So that we have worked with them around corrective action plans to ensure that those non-compliances are fixed. For the factories who can't yet attain full certification, then we have support programs. And our teams are on the ground. So when you can't get to factories, we can, and we're there to provide really your eyes and ears on the ground. I'll send this presentation out afterwards so you can go through some of these benefits in a bit more detail if they're not known to you. And obviously ask me any questions on our work in as we come to the end of this presentation or one-to-one afterwards. So that's it from Ethical Toy Program. Let me hand back to Matteo, who will get into the details now of the opportunities and challenges specifically in Southeast and South Asia.
Thank you. Thank you. South Asia. Just to start a little bit on where is South Asia. It's a pretty big geographical area. It's a pretty big block. And Carmel, if you can move to the next slide. As you can see, it's here in green. And so South Asia is what we you can press again. Is what we refer as essentially two big blocks. One block composed of the countries in Southeast Asia, also known as ASEAN, as Lizum mentioned earlier, so the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where we have 10 countries in Southeast Asia that are joined under this umbrella, plus the whole block of India. And of course, when we look at this area, we are looking at close to 2 billion people. ASEAN, on that point of view, is the third largest economy in Asia, fifth globally. And both ASEAN and India, they have experienced over the past 15 to 20 years, very high GDP growth rates. The average of ASEAN was over 5%, whereas the average of India was about 7%. So the geographical and the demographics of this area are really great from a lot of standpoints. And one important factor that is very relevant for the toy industry, and also when it comes to sourcing and manufacturing in this part of the world, is a very fast-growing middle class. A very fast-growing middle class with great and good spending power, and also with the more sophisticated taste. And we'll see later that this taste brings a lot of opportunities in these markets. As I mentioned, the population is growing. The middle class in ASEAN is expected to double by 2030, and 35% of the total ASEAN population, so about 200 plus million people, are aged between 0 and 19. So a nice bracket of potential customers for the toy industry. On the other hand, about 350 million people in India are also aged 0 to 14. So again, a lot of potential there too. Of course, there is, as I mentioned, the sophisticated taste allows the families, parents, to look at toys also a little bit more with not only just to play, but also to learn and to have more educational purposes. So, and this is something that the SEATA is going to work on, because as Lisa mentioned earlier, you know, the value of play is for sure a topic which is underrated and extremely important. So it's one of the focuses that SEATA will take care of in the next months. So in terms of the geographical area, we have also have to see that this, you know, the area in Southeast Asia is very broad, and you have countries like Singapore, which are very small, and largely, you know, Singapore is only 800 square kilometers, so it's extremely small. But then you have also other countries like Indonesia, which they are extremely wide, extremely broad, extremely big, and they are spread across thousands and thousands of islands. Same thing for the Philippines. So in this case, you'll see that, of course, you have big cities where this middle class will concentrate, but also second-tier cities and third-tier cities become extremely important. And whenever you consider expanding in this part of the world, you need to make sure that also your go-to-market strategy, so from supply, manufacturing, supply chain, and go-to-market, is extremely fast and is extremely efficient, because in these fast times where, you know, social medias and internet and so on are used on a daily basis, and mobile, etc., you need to be there very fast, because if you lose 1 month, then all everything is gone. But of course, Southeast Asia is not new, and South Asia in general is not new to the world. I've been here for over 10 years, and I can tell you that already 13 years ago, when I moved to Singapore, there was a lot of interest in this part of the world. This interest has been has accelerated in the last, I would say, 24 months, due to a number of reasons. One is the China-US trade war, which has it was a starting point to a certain extent to, you know, for companies to look at alternatives of sourcing and manufacturing beyond China. Then, of course, if we move a little bit, also regarding China, there are certain aspects in China that are pushing, like increasing labor cost, that are pushing, and maybe also a less reliance on manufacturing for China, and a less reliance on exports, but more focusing on the domestic market. That I know I'm making sure that you know, the government may not incentivize manufacturing as they did 20 or 30 years ago. Then, of course, looking a little bit to the left, looking at India, recently in the past, I would say, 24, 36 months, there have been a lot of disputes between ASEAN and China, especially on you know, territorial disputes in the South China Sea. So there is also a little bit of a sentiment which is probably not seen super positive versus China. And last but not least, COVID-19, and Carmel already mentioned this in her words. And you know, the first 2 months of 2020, companies globally realized that maybe they are a little bit too heavy on the China side when it comes to manufacturing and supply chain. So they are definitely exploring ways of diversifying. So if a new pandemic happens, or you know, if there's some disruption in China, they can still produce, they can still source their products, and they can still go to the markets. On top of it, I mean, let's not forget that other blocks like the European Union are looking at, you know, already since 15 years, they're looking at this part of the world. They've initiated a very intensive process of setting up bilateral FTAs with a lot of Southeast Asian countries, as well as India. You have Japan that has always historically been very active in this part of the world with a lot of investments, especially in infrastructure, and the US. The US been very present in the region, both politically, from a military standpoint, and now more than ever in this sort of tensions with China. So what's important also to highlight is that Southeast Asia in particular, they are not strangers to the toy industry. I think the slide from Carmel is it was great to show the percentage of their factories certified, when you see that, of course, 90+% is in China, but you see also some names there like Thailand, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, and this proves that there is already some toy manufacturing in this part of the world. These countries are connected to global supply chains, and in this, I mean, ASEAN as and same thing with India, they have signed a number of free trade agreements with a lot of key partners, including ASEAN China, ASEAN India, ASEAN Japan, ASEAN Australia, for example. And now all these countries, they are discussing or a broader trade agreement, which is called RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is being negotiated, I think it's already 4 or 5 years, and they plan to put all these FTAs under one big group, under one big agreement, which for sure will give a great advantage to the region to position themselves in a more stronger place in the world, in the world supply chain, the world economies. What I will next slide, Carmel, please. What I will discuss a little bit more in detail now is I picked 4 countries, and I will share briefly the opportunities as well as the challenges, and how both IETP and SEATA can help companies to really be successful in this part of the world. Singapore, for those who don't know, my home, it's what we call the Asia Light. Is the hub of Southeast Asia. A lot of companies have their regional headquarters here, and they usually have a tough competition with Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur. It's a little nation state, very open to trade, politically extremely stable, and where business is very easy to conduct business. Singapore is always in the top 2 in the ease of doing business rankings since many years. Of course, the size of Singapore, it's very small. There are about 5.5 million people, and it's a tiny island. But the government does a lot to attract companies here to set up key functions, and in return they give a lot of a very favorable, a very open, and a very good taxation environment, rebates and so on. The Singapore has world-class facilities that goes from from the logistic hub. What the Singapore port is probably one of the top 3 most busiest ports in the world after Hong Kong and Shanghai, but they always fight for #1 position. And this is also thanks to the geographical location of Singapore, which is strategically positioned in the Strait of Malacca, which connects basically Vietnam, China, all the way to the Middle East, and then to Europe. The facilities are world class, as well also the workforce, which is highly skilled, which in turn also could be seen as maybe a small challenge, because it makes it expensive, but there are a lot of benefits to be here in Singapore and to manage the region. Indonesia, And then I'll share a little bit more about the challenges later. But for Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, I would say there are a lot of opportunities. A lot of the concepts that I'll be sharing are common across all these countries, but of course they come in different flavors and also in different strengths, I would say. Indonesia is very important for the toy industry. Roughly half of the world dolls are manufactured in Indonesia, and so this makes it a very important market for certain member companies. And also in the past few years, especially with the recent with the current administration, there's been a lot of push for the government to develop manufacturing. That can be direct manufacturing, it can be contract manufacturing, and so on. Indonesia has set up 11 special economic zones where companies have benefits in terms of import, in terms of export, in terms of workforce, etc. And there's been a lot of push also for the industry 4.0. So modernizing industry, automation, etc. A lot of companies, for example, in the automotive sector, are setting up manufacturing plants in Indonesia. The investment environment has improved. I would say, like in Vietnam and like in India, there is still, there's still a long way to go. But in the rankings over the past few years, they have really improved. And so this is all good signs to see that the governments are understanding the opportunities. They're understanding that they can attract companies from overseas to set up shop in Indonesia or in Vietnam, and then they're trying to get their house in order and to make sure that they are welcoming and the processes are easy, etc. The middle class, the domestic market is very strong. You have, as I mentioned earlier, this fast-growing middle class with very interesting tastes, and they want to focus a lot on quality as well. I mean, you have money to spend these days, so you wanna make sure you have the latest toy. You wanna make sure you have the latest trend. You wanna make sure you follow the latest trend. You wanna make sure also that the toy that you purchase is safe from from a health point of view. And that is why the government has set up the Indonesian National Standard, SNI, which when it came out a few years back, it was very burdensome for a lot of companies. And as Lisa mentioned, the industry, SEATA, they've been working very hard with the government to improve this standard. I would say it's not perfect, but for sure it's a great achievement that we did over the past 3 or 4 years. And of course, the work is not finished there. We are continuing to engage with the government, to engage with the authorities to make it better, right? To improve it even more, and to make sure that also Indonesia is positioned very well in the global supply chain. Vietnam is also the toy industry in Vietnam is also very important. And in the world ranking, Vietnam is about the 14th largest toy exporter. Some Japanese toy companies already set up shop here, as well as a lot of Chinese manufacturers that, due to proximity to Vietnam, they also started setting up some factories there. Over the past years, Vietnam has experienced again very strong and very GDP growth, and because of that, the government has worked a lot to create, to sign free trade agreements, to enable trade facilitation, to simplify export and import processes, etc. One of the important thing about Vietnam, I would say, is that the political scene is very stable. Is a communist country, so it's very stable, and things, I would say, in theory, tend to work. Of course, you have also some challenges there, and same story for Indonesia. They've moved up the ranks in the ease of doing business. Of course, they're still behind Indonesia, if I don't remember wrong, and there's still a lot of things to clarify and to improve. But I can tell you that 10 years ago, Vietnam was untouchable, whereas nowadays is opening up to foreign entities and much more. So it's an internationalization process which is very promising, and we already see that a lot of companies, for example, in the high tech sector, like Samsung, they set up massive plants in north of Vietnam to diversify from Korea. When it comes to India, amazing country. Very, of course, India, 1.3, 1.4 billion people, very aggressive, and with the government also pushing very hard to develop a toy industry, a domestic toy industry, but also to develop a trade win and to and from India. So set up in pushing for more manufacturing there, for more exports, but also to have better imports, more safer toys coming into India. The population of India, as I mentioned, the spending power are all key factors. So whenever you may consider to set up shop there, of course you have you can win very easily, because also for other sectors like the cosmetics or the F&B, what has proven to be extremely successful is localization. So to have factories to manufacture there and then go to market very fast, and this has been proven a winning factor for all those sectors. And I believe, in my limited knowledge of the toy industry, that will be also a winning factor for the toy industry. This can be said also for Indonesia, for example, as well as for Vietnam. And thanks to the network of free trade agreements between all these countries, even though you set up a factory in Indonesia, for example, or you do sourcing there, you can in a very efficient and I would say very fast way reach the markets of all of ASEAN, for example, within 24 hours. And this is extremely important, because when later on I'll talk about, when you define your strategy, you want to make sure that you have a local strategy and also a regional strategy. Next slide, please. So fantastic, as you know, as you probably see from my words, I'm very optimistic and very excited about this part of the world. It's been home, so I'm always been a promoter of Southeast Asia, and I think there is really a lot of opportunities there. But of course, with opportunities, you have challenges. And again, in all these countries, you have some common challenges, and to a certain degree, some are easy to address and some are a little less easy to address. Singapore, not gonna spend too much time on that. Yeah, it's a very developed country, so costs tend to be high. That's why the government pushes for only certain strategic functions to be located in Singapore. The market is very developed, especially for the toy industry. It's it's an extremely developed market, but it's small. Also, from a demographic point of view, fertility rate in Singapore are not that great, and they're in line with like European countries like Italy. So yeah, small market, but of course from here you have access to a larger pool of consumers. Indonesia, Vietnam, and also India, they all have a lot of regulatory methods, processes, standards, which are a problem. really are a problem, really can increase a lot of the costs to companies, import, export, manufacturing, and so on. So these are all complex problems that, you know, associations like SEATA, but also we work a lot with local association and an association like IETP can help lobbying the government, and that's exactly one of our main activities, you know, lobbying the stakeholders to make sure that these processes, these regulations, these standards are changed in a more favorable way for the toy industry. Of course, we always argue that it's important to have standards because, you know better than me, you know, they help against, you know, they give safety to the toys and also, you know, peace of mind to the parents, for example. But at the same time, they also block illegal trade, illegal imports of toys that may be counterfeited. So the standards are extremely important. But when it comes to standards, there are different degrees on how you set up the standards. For example, Indonesia, as we mentioned earlier, the SNI, it was very complex, very sophisticated, whereas Vietnam, well, now not anymore, but on the other hand, Vietnam also from the very beginning, they started to adopt standards which are in line with the international standards. So company they wanted to set up there, they had a little easier life, let's put it that way, to enter Vietnam. In Indonesia, workforce can be perceived sometimes as low skilled. So companies may need to invest in some, you know, upgrading of knowledge, know-how transfer, etc. Labor laws in countries like Indonesia are could be a challenge for the manufacturing cycles of the toy industry. So this is something that, of course, not only for the toy industry, but in general for a lot of industries, you know, industry associations are lobbying the government. Raw materials in Indonesia are still imported, especially most of the raw materials for the toy manufacturing. So it could be that there is a need to develop a little bit more the sourcing of the raw materials locally. I mean, it's a huge country, and they could have that potential. And what is lacking there is a little bit of an industry cluster. So from raw materials all the way to manufacturing. So they still rely a little bit too much on imports from China. Vietnam, as I mentioned earlier, I think corruption is still widely spread. And this, it's a bit, yeah, it stops business a lot of time, especially I had a bit of experience in my previous company that, yeah, corruption is still very much there. The business environment is still very much domestic. Opening up, as I mentioned, to the rest of the world, but still largely domestic. And this, as a consequence, doesn't let them understand the full potential also the domestic toy industry and what it can bring. India is over the past years, I would say, has developed a little bit more of a, if I can say, nationalistic sentiment. You know, made in India, do it in India are keywords that we hear more and more, and especially recently in the past 8 months, the government has put their attention onto the toy industry in the wrong way, I would say. They decided to block somehow. They decided that, you know, cheap Chinese toys were no longer welcome, and then they put in place a number of new measures to kind of block and cut out these cheap imports from Chinese toys. Of course, the industry was a bit caught off guard, but now we already engage, and we already see a little bit of movement and a little bit of success in trying to put the India on the right track, as well as, you know, to set up capacity building with the government, and get the industry all aligned to work together with the government and to really build a domestic toy industry like the government wants. So for domestic consumption, but also a lot for exports. So of course, COVID hasn't improved the things, but actually has made a little bit of things worse. India is still largely on lockdown, with customs working at 30% capacity, 40% capacity. So this has brought a lot of delays in getting containers of toys into the country. And SEATA is already engaging locally since months with partners to make sure that we work together with the government hand in hand to really try to fix this and really to develop something together which is beneficial for the country, but also for the manufacturers. But for sure, yeah, this is a big challenge, and it needs to be, taken into consideration. Next 2 slides, please. So recommendation: keep it very simple. The region has a lot of opportunities. It can be a huge success for companies. It can help diversify the reliance on the over-reliance on China, I would say. It can open a lot of opportunities to the great domestic markets of these countries. More spending power. The growth is still in Asia. Europe and US, I understand also from a toy point of view, are somehow saturated markets. So the opportunities for growth is really in Asia. But of course, when it comes to Asia and Southeast Asia in particular, you need to know how to move around. You need to have the local expertise. You cannot just show up and pretend to do business here. It takes a little bit of time to set up networks, to set up knowledge, to get partners on board that can help, reputable partners, because there are a lot of dodgy partners there, that can help you to develop your business. And in this IETP and SEATA, that we have men on the ground, and we've been in this part of the world for decades, can help in navigating all the hurdles, all the complexities that these countries may have. One thing that for me is extremely important, and I've seen a lot of companies failing in this, especially in my previous job with the European Chamber of Commerce, is when you define the strategy. It's important that you come here and you have a strategy, of course, but you cannot have just an Asian strategy, because the Asian strategy is too broad. It's very important to have a local strategy, so a country strategy where you want to perhaps develop a little bit more. And this country strategy then needs to fit nicely in a more broader regional strategy. And in this way, you can get the best of both worlds, right? You can develop your manufacturer, your sourcing in one country, and then through supply chains, you can then cover all the other countries in the region, but also beyond the region. Can be Europe, can be US, wherever is your biggest market. So having these interlocking strategies is extremely important, and also physical presence. I believe if you want to be successful here, you need to be present. You need to be present in a way or another, and it's important. It's still all these, a lot of business relationships are done face to face, are done in person, and it takes months to develop, and it's all about trust. So the more you're here, the more you can go in those countries, visit the countries, invest time to meet your partners, to develop personal relationship with the partners is essential. And in my previous job, I lived on an airplane, because I was covering the whole region. So every week I was in a different country just to maintain the relationships that in turn turned out to be a winning factor, because then I could build up the business. And I think I spoke too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo. So that is the end of the presentation. We have gone a little over time, but there have been some questions that have come through. So I suggest we try and answer some of those before we end the webinar so that they're on the recording and we can share that recording afterwards. So if anyone does have any questions, please use the chat function in Zoom and they will come straight through to me, and I can either try to answer them today during this webinar, pose them to or share them with Lisa or Matteo to answer if they're more in their area. But most importantly, we'll get back to any questions that we haven't been able to answer during this session. We'll come back to the individuals after the event directly. But maybe there's a couple of questions that are worth covering off now immediately. The first is, I think in reflection of, Matteo, what you've shared around the opportunities in sourcing and manufacturing in Southern Asia. Do you believe that there are any concerns about capacity in the market that need to be addressed? So if the industry moved quickly to try and move, you know, a significant percentage of their manufacturing, say from mainland China to Indonesia, is the capability in Indonesia to meet that demand?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends how fast how fast this shift happens. But I know for sure that in Indonesia, for example, there's still capacity, and I mean, there is a lot of investment and a lot of hunger from governments to develop the capacity. So I would say it's a good problem to have. And knowing how dynamic these countries are, the governments will really push and will really help to set up manufacturing. Now, I'm not an expert on toy manufacturing, so I don't know how sophisticated the factories need to be. But I know that for sure in my previous job, when we were considering setting up a microchip fab in Vietnam, the government moved very fast, so they can make things happen. There is a lot of very smart businessmen here. If they see that the business case is there, they have the money to make it happen very fast. So yeah, definitely a good problem to have.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that's really good to know that there is support for the industry to move, whether it's be from governments, investors, the business owners themselves to respond to the needs of the toy industry. So that's really, really encouraging. I'd also add to Matteo's comment that from the Ethical Toy Program, we are already in a number of factories in that area. So as an example, Vietnam, nearly 50 factories. So there is existing capacity there. But there is also the ability to share the learnings and develop new manufacturers. So as we've seen in India, for example, it could be a factory that wasn't traditionally a toy factory, may have been involved in another area of manufacturing, but is prepared to diversify into toy manufacturing. And as they make that tradition and establish them, then the Ethical Toy Program can be there to support them to make sure that they get to the standards that you require as buyers very quickly. So that's that one. Hopefully that answers that question fully. But again, any more specifics in that particular area, then please feel free to email either myself or Matteo, and our email addresses are on the slide that you're looking at now. Another question, Matteo, for you would be around, could you share a little more about the specific services or support that companies can get from the Southeast Asia Toy Association? So a little bit more to understand how a company might engage with you directly.
Okay, so we have some activities that we've done that we have done in the past, and we will continue to do in the future. Plus, we're also developing some more. Now, these they try to be 360. So they try to help sort of all companies They can go from manufacturing all the way to really enter a country and do business there. So it can also help them to protect their brand. So if going back to the 4 pillars that we presented earlier, for example, when it comes to IPR, intellectual property rights, we partner up with local partners to do investigation, to do market analysis of the counterfeiting problems in certain countries, and also to partner up with local authorities to do raids to warehouses and shops to block certain counterfeits to hit the market. When it comes to business support, we work hand in hand with companies to see and to analyze what they want to achieve in a certain market. Okay, they may be happy with the manufacturing in China, but how they're gonna enter, let's say, Indonesia, how they're gonna enter in Singapore. So through our network of partners, we will link them up, and with distributors, retailers, and so on. And this is what we are building now to make sure that, okay, I want to go to Indonesia. These are your 4 or 5 partners that you can that we can talk to together. We can go and visit them together and see how we can set up a new business or a new a new relationship. When it comes, of course, to events, we do a lot of knowledge sharing, seminars and webinars like this, where we want to really spread the knowledge and the information about this exciting part of the world. A lot of people know where Southeast Asia is, but they don't really know the intricacies and really the opportunities, what's happening here. And then we do all the work on public awareness. So we have working groups that deal, industry working groups that deal with topics of interest across the the overall industry. That can be sustainability, can be working together to find the next plastic for the toys. So topics which are shared by companies, competitors, and none, and the team up together and really produce something which then will be useful for the overall industry. Toy safety, extremely important. Try to develop standards across the region that simplifies import, export, etc. Working with the ASEAN Secretariat in this case to make sure that this could be recognized at ASEAN level. So you have one set of standards for everyone. Maybe a utopia, but we need to work for something, and I think eventually we will get there. Like for example in the EU. So we have a lot of activities, and now we are like shaping them in, I would say, in an organic way. And I really hope there's a lot of more interest to joining with us, and also to run the agenda with us, because us alone we can't run everything, and we rely a lot on the expertise of the members to really pick the topics and run, for example, the agenda of the working groups, or set up a webinar or set up an event.
Ooh, sorry, I've just lost my presentation. Great. Okay. Well, we are getting loads and loads of questions actually come through, and we are completely out of time and over time. So what I suggest we do is that I work with Matteo on these additional questions, and we provide some answers to those when we send out the link to the recording and also the link to this presentation. Fantastic to see so much interest, and great to see such a diverse range of questions as well. So we shall wrap it up now. I'd like to just end by thanking Lizum particularly for her time and sharing the establishment of the Southeast Asian Toy Associations, the reason behind that, and what you're looking to do in the future. So thank you, Lizum, for your time. Thank you to Matteo for sharing your time, and for all of you who've participated in this meeting. I hope you've all found it useful, judging by the number of questions and the number of participants. I think you have. And like I say, we will follow it up with an email shortly to you all. But please remember, we are here to help you. So at any time, any questions, please just email either Matteo or myself. Keep up to date with information and news from the Ethical Toy Program through our webinars, through newsletters, and the same also for the Southeast Toy Association. So until we speak again, I wish you all well, stay healthy, stay well. Thank you all very much.
Thank Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.